The world narrows to white. There is no horizon here, only a soft merging of snow and sky, as if creation itself never bothered to draw a boundary. Wind hums through emptiness, sculpting drifts that move like breathing, erasing footprints within minutes. To stand on this continent is to feel the scale of your own heartbeat measured against eternity. At the bottom of the world, Antarctica is more than land. It is memory in solid form. Beneath each layer of ice lies another century, another forgotten season pressed into transparency. Scientists say the continent has kept the planet's diary for 1 million years, but some diaries are not meant to be read. The team arrived under a sun that never truly set. Their aircraft carved a shadow across miles of untouched brightness before touching down on the pale runway of the research station. The engines fell silent, and in that instant the emptiness felt alive, an unseen consciousness waiting patiently beneath the cold. They joked about ghosts in parkas, about hearing their thoughts echo back from the snow. None of them laughed for long. The station itself stood like a cluster of red cubes on an endless sheet of glass. Inside, the hum of generators provided the illusion of civilization. Outside, the air was older than sound. Nights passed without darkness, days without warmth. Conversations slowed, then thinned, as if the vast silence outside were slowly teaching the human voice its proper size. Then the instruments began to whisper. At first, it was only a tremor in the readings, tiny fluctuations in the magnetometers positioned along the glacier's edge. Dr. Evelyn Kerr, the station's geophysicist, adjusted her headphones and frowned. The pattern was too precise, a pulse every 12 seconds, rhythmic as a heartbeat. Seismic activity, perhaps, but the frequency was wrong. It wasn't the crack of shifting ice. It was something steadier, deliberate. For 3 nights they recorded the signal. It came from far below, deeper than any probe had reached. When plotted on a graph, the sound traced an elegant curve, almost musical. The others dismissed it as instrument noise, a quirk of pressure and wind. Evelyn disagreed. The signal seemed to respond to them, its rhythm altering slightly whenever the drilling teams moved equipment above ground. On the 4th night, the signal stopped. In its place came a hollow pause, followed by 3 faint tones, rising and falling like a breath drawn across glass. It was not language, yet it carried intent. They replayed the recording again and again until exhaustion blurred reason. Someone joked that the ice was knocking back. Nobody laughed at all this time. By morning, curiosity overcame caution. The team began reviewing archived transmissions from past expeditions. That was when they found the fragment, a radio log from 1938 belonging to the Valkyrie expedition, a joint scientific venture lost in a storm near Queen Maud Land. The final entry, half buried in static, described geometric anomalies detected beneath the glacier and a low resonance as of machinery. The log ended abruptly, with coordinates that placed it less than 50 kilometers from the modern station. Evelyn printed the entry and pinned it beside the map. The coincidence felt too exact. She traced the lines where old ice met new, where tectonic calm concealed hidden depth. If the 1938 signal and theirs shared an origin, something below the ice had been awake long enough to outlast generations. Days later, a supply pilot delivered a parcel wrapped in waxed cloth, an antique chart requested from a museum in Lisbon. Its parchment smelled faintly of smoke and brine. Labeled Piri Reis 1513, it showed the world as sailors once imagined it. Continents stretched, oceans guessed. But one detail stole the breath from every throat in the room. Where Antarctica should have been a featureless white mass, the map showed a coastline free of ice, mountains, rivers, and bays drawn with impossible precision. If the map were genuine, someone had charted the continent before it froze, tens of thousands of years before recorded history. The implications were absurd, yet the coordinates on the old parchment matched the signal's source almost perfectly. Evelyn ran a fingertip along the curve of that ancient shore and felt a tremor pass through her. She looked up at her colleagues, their faces pale in the sterile light. None spoke. For a moment, the silence of the continent seemed to lean closer, listening. Outside, the wind began to change. The sky thickened with cloud color draining into shades of pewter. The generators groaned as temperatures fell. A storm was forming, vast and deliberate. That night the first flakes fell, slow, heavy, unhurried. The storm built itself without thunder, just a sustained pressure that felt like thought. Radios flickered, satellites dropped from signal range. By dawn, they were alone. Inside the red cubes of the station, time warped. Hours stretched thin, conversation returned to whispers. The blizzard howled like a giant breathing through the walls, and in the spaces between gusts the team swore they could still hear it, that faint pulse from beneath the ice, steady as a sleeping heart. When the storm finally broke, it left the landscape carved in silence. The wind had polished everything to glass. The horizon was so clean it felt fictional, sky folding into earth with the precision of a single thought. The team stepped outside as if entering a cathedral, breath visible, words unnecessary. The antennas were gone, the outer instruments buried, but something deeper had changed. The ground itself. The magnetic readings had shifted overnight, pulling their compass needles toward a new point just east of the station, directly above the coordinates from the 1938 Valkyrie Log. It was Evelyn who spoke first. "We drill there." The ice at that spot was old, dense, layered with the weight of a million winters. The operation took 2 days of uninterrupted work, each core sample groaning as it rose from the drill. At 60 meters, they found something unexpected, a hollow. Sonar returned empty space where only solid glacial mass should exist. The cavity extended for miles, its edges geometric, too perfect for erosion. They lowered a probe with cameras and lights. What returned was a world made of faint blue luminescence, walls smooth as marble, and a floor that curved gently down like the bowl of a vast amphitheater. The air temperature inside registered far warmer than the ice above it. When the feed flickered, Evelyn leaned closer to the monitor. On the chamber's wall, the ice was etched, not by nature, but by pattern. Straight lines intersected with angles of 90 degrees, impossible for geological processes. The shapes were worn but deliberate, a sequence of symbols repeating like an equation carved by light itself. "It's not a cave," whispered one of the engineers. "It's architecture." The next day, they widened the shaft, assembling a temporary descent capsule, a metal cradle on a cable meant for one person at a time. The first to volunteer was Evelyn. She descended slowly, passing through layers of blue that thickened to indigo. The hum of the winch faded until only her breathing remained. At 40 meters, she broke through into open air. The capsule swayed gently. Her headlamp swept across smooth walls that glittered with crystalline veins, like circuitry frozen mid-glow. The air was damp and strangely sweet, carrying no scent of decay. It was warm enough that vapor rose from her suit, haloing her in mist. She stepped out, her boots striking stone. Real stone, polished, jointless, extending farther than her light could reach. For a moment she forgot to breathe. The chamber was vast, larger than any hall mankind had ever built, domed high above and ribbed with pillars of translucent ice that shimmered faintly from within. It was not ruin, it was suspension. The others followed, one by one, descending through the narrow throat of the earth. Their voices echoed softly, merging into a kind of accidental harmony. No one dared speak loudly. The space itself demanded reverence. As they moved deeper, the glow intensified, coming not from their lamps but from the walls. The light pulsed faintly, rhythmic, steady. The same 12-second beat the instruments had recorded weeks before. They followed the glow through an arched corridor where frost formed perfect spirals. At its end lay a massive gateway, half buried in translucent ice. Through the surface, they could see shapes beyond, structures of domes and spires, entire boulevards of something once alive now held in crystal suspension. The scale defied reason. "City," Evelyn murmured. "There's a city down here." For hours they stood in silence, trying to take in the enormity of what they saw. The place seemed frozen mid-motion, as if caught between seconds of some forgotten dawn. Even the shadows looked deliberate, painted into the ice. In the center of the gateway, a circular symbol glowed faintly, 3 concentric rings surrounding a single point of light. When Evelyn brushed her glove against it, the glow flared brighter, then faded back into its patient rhythm. They began to record everything, images, coordinates, temperature readings, but equipment failed almost immediately. Batteries drained, lenses fogged. Only analog tools functioned: pencils, sketchpads, memory. It was as if the place refused to be documented, permitting only witness, not replication. When they finally returned to the surface, night had fallen. The aurora rippled across the sky in colors none of them had seen before, greens shifting to violet to gold, to white so bright it bled into blue. The signal from below pulsed again, stronger this time, resonating through the ice and into the bones of their chests. They looked at one another, each searching for confirmation that this was real, not altitude madness or light trick. Evelyn raised a hand toward the sky. "The ice remembers," she said softly. And somewhere below, as if answering, the glacier exhaled a low, resonant sigh, an echo that traveled through every layer of the earth until it vanished into the night. Sleep became difficult after the descent. The walls of the station creaked through the night, not from wind or cold, but from something slower, an occasional deep tremor that rose from beneath their feet and dissolved into stillness again. When the wind stopped, they could almost mistake it for breathing. Evelyn sat in the communications room, staring at the old parchment map beside the new sonar printouts. The coastlines aligned too perfectly. Even the river paths matched. Someone, long before ice ruled this land, had mapped it precisely. And now, beneath miles of frozen silence, they had found what those ancient cartographers might have remembered. By the third day, the signal returned, stronger than before. Its rhythm had changed from a pulse to a sequence, like a code or melody. Every 12 seconds it climbed in pitch, then fell again, echoing faintly through the glacier. The sound carried warmth. It made the air inside the station vibrate gently, as though every molecule were being reminded of an older harmony. "Maybe it's geothermal," one of the engineers whispered. "Heat waves, resonance." But his voice lacked conviction. They all knew it was something else. They returned to the chamber at dawn. The entrance shaft gleamed faintly in the perpetual light, rimmed with frost that shimmered as if lit from within. This time they brought only mechanical recorders, spring-driven devices immune to electrical interference. Descending again, they found the corridors brighter than before. The ice seemed thinner now, clearer, as if responding to their presence. The city beyond the gate shimmered with half-seen movement, reflections that didn't quite belong to their lamps. The floor patterns beneath their boots resembled constellations. The walls exhaled faint warmth. They walked through what might once have been a plaza, bordered by columns so tall they disappeared into shadow. At the center stood a structure shaped like a spiral rising into a dome, its surface carved with lines that formed no language yet suggested meaning, a geometry that felt alive. Evelyn approached it carefully. The structure hummed faintly under her touch. She placed her palm flat against the ice. The sound deepened, wrapping around her like a voice. For an instant she saw not with eyes but with something older, images blooming behind her mind, green landscapes, towers bathed in sunlight, rivers flowing where now there was only cold. A civilization vast and luminous, vanishing beneath a sky of falling snow. Then silence again. She pulled her hand away, trembling. "It's memory," she whispered. "The ice remembers everything." The team stood in the center of the chamber as light pulsed upward through the spiral's core. Sensors recorded faint magnetism, temperature rising by degrees. The glow spread across the plaza, illuminating the carvings and revealing faces, human or almost. Their features were elongated, serene, caught mid-expression as though frozen during conversation. It was not a tomb, it was preservation. Something deep below shifted, a sound like distant thunder, muffled by miles of ice. Instruments shook. Snow crystals fell from the ceiling in a glittering cascade. The light in the spiral flared once, then dimmed again, leaving only the faint pulse of the city's unseen heart. They knew they had woken something ancient, though whether it was alive or only memory no one could tell. The glacier's hum returned, steady and calm, as if it were waiting for them to understand before it would speak again. They retreated to the surface, silent and awestruck. The horizon glowed faintly violet. Even the air felt charged, vibrating at the edge of hearing. When night came, and with it the dance of Aurora, the lights in the sky mirrored the rhythm they had heard below, rising and falling, a dialogue between earth and heaven carried in color. Evelyn watched from the observation deck, her breath forming small clouds that vanished instantly. "It's not just preservation," she said softly. "It's protection. The ice isn't keeping them for us. It's keeping us from them." The others said nothing. There was nothing left to add. The sky rippled with spectral fire, and beneath it the continent whispered its secrets back into silence. And in that vast, soundless expanse, where even thought seemed to freeze mid-breath, the oldest question remained, unspoken but present in every heart. Was the ice merely remembering what came before, or guarding what waits to return? Morning brought no sunrise, only a pale diffusion of light crawling across the snow. The storm had passed, yet the air still carried the memory of motion, the faint hiss of something alive beneath the calm. The research station had become a monastery of unease, its corridors filled with the quiet rustle of paper, the crackle of static, the breathing of people who had seen too much and could not yet name it. Evelyn stood before the map wall again, tracing the coordinates of the buried city with a gloved finger. The ink bled slightly from the damp. The paper seemed to pulse in rhythm with the faint hum that still emanated from the glacier. In that hum, she could almost hear the echo of the spiral chamber's light, a steady, unhurried heartbeat older than language. The discovery had begun to reshape their reason. Engineers became poets in their field notes, describing the ice as thinking, the stone as remembering. The logical mind had no foothold here. Every law of geology they knew had been inverted. Heat beneath cold, life beneath stillness, pattern beneath chaos. By the second day after their descent, the signal returned again, stronger, sharper. This time it carried harmonics, overtones that shimmered like choral voices layered within the same note. When slowed and filtered, the frequency revealed complex ratios, mathematical relationships hidden inside the sound. It wasn't random. It was design. The question now wasn't what was beneath the ice, but who. Evelyn began assembling a timeline of possibility. If the Piri Reis map truly showed an ice-free Antarctica, it suggested the continent had once been temperate, covered in rivers and forests before it froze. That would have been at least 12,000 years ago, around the same time myths of Atlantis, Lemuria, and Mu began to echo through human memory. But myths, she knew, were rarely pure invention. They were distortions of something once witnessed, truths reflected through the water of time until their edges blurred. She returned to the carvings on her recording slate, the intersecting rings found in the chamber. Their geometry was simple yet impossibly precise, each ratio aligned with mathematical constants later rediscovered by Euclid and Pythagoras. Whoever built the city had understood not only structure, but harmony, how to make matter vibrate in tune with thought. In the archives of the station, an old paper mentioned similar patterns found on artifacts from pre-dynastic Egypt and others in the Andes. Different continents, different millennia, but the same motifs: spirals, triads, concentric circles. It was as if the world's earliest cultures had all been taught the same visual language, and this place beneath the Antarctic ice was the origin. At dinner, the team spoke little. Steam rose from their bowls in ghostly curls, disappearing into the hum of the heaters. Evelyn stared into her reflection on the metal table, wondering whether humanity had ever truly been alone. That night, unable to sleep, she reviewed a list of expedition reports, most classified, some forgotten. The oldest dated back to the late 19th century, explorers reporting warm air vents and anomalous light sources near the South Pole. The details were vague, yet all hinted at a region of unnatural stability beneath the ice, an inner plateau that defied both temperature and time. She paused on a name she didn't recognize. Dr. Victor Renaud, geologist, 1938. Attached was a single surviving letter. The formations below are too perfect to be of glacial origin. We are trespassing on architecture. I believe the builders predate humanity as we know it, perhaps the same that our myths call gods. If we disturb them, I fear we will awaken not wrath, but remembrance. The letter ended there. Renaud and his team vanished days later. Their camp was found buried under 3 meters of ice, untouched by wind, as if preserved deliberately. Evelyn closed the file and turned off the light. But sleep brought no peace, only visions of vast halls shimmering under ice, of figures tall and serene moving like reflections through light. When she woke, her notebook was open on her lap, filled with sketches she didn't remember drawing, spirals, circles, and a shape like a rising sun carved into an arch. The next morning she called the team together. "We're missing something," she said. "These structures, these symbols, they're not random. They're records, a language written in geometry." The engineers frowned, but no one argued. Even skepticism had begun to thaw. They decided to return to the chamber, this time equipped with non-electronic tools, chalk, compasses, mirrors. The path down the shaft had widened slightly, as though the glacier itself were yielding to them. The air grew warmer with each descent. When they reached the plaza, the light was different, gentler, golden, as if filtered through ancient glass. It was Dr. Malik, their mathematician, who noticed the first clue. He held a compass above the ground and watched the needle spin. Then he drew lines across the floor's star-like pattern. The intersections formed perfect alignments with the constellations above the southern sky, as they would have appeared 12,000 years ago. "This city," Malik whispered, "was built to mirror the heavens as they once were." They looked up through the ceiling of translucent ice, where the faint gleam of starlight still filtered through miles of frost. Somewhere in that alignment, history shifted. The builders had not been primitive. They had been astronomers, architects, and philosophers in one. Evelyn knelt beside a column of crystal and brushed away frost. Beneath it, faint engravings shimmered into view, scenes of a civilization alive with light, people walking among radiant towers, the sun drawn larger than life. And beneath it, a symbol, a circle divided by 6 rays, each tipped with a smaller circle. It looked less like a sun and more like a device, perhaps the key to how they shaped light itself. "The architects of stone and light," Evelyn murmured, recalling Renaud's words. Perhaps that was what they had been, the ones who learned to sculpt illumination, who turned geometry into power. The silence in the chamber deepened, warm and electric. It no longer felt empty, it felt waiting. The footsteps faded as quickly as they had come. For a long moment, the team stood motionless in the golden half-light of the chamber, listening to the echo dissolve into stillness. Each of them thought the same thing, but no one dared to say it. The sound had not come from them. Evelyn raised a hand for silence, though it was unnecessary. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. The only sound was the slow pulse of the ice, a low, resonant hum that felt almost like a voice whispering from inside the walls. "Could it be meltwater movement?" Malik asked finally, his voice too loud in the stillness. "Or a resonance from the equipment," another suggested, though their instruments were still and powerless. Evelyn shook her head. No, it was patterned, intentional. They moved cautiously toward the sound's direction, marking their path with red chalk. The corridor curved gently downward, the walls translucent and shot through with veins of light. Some veins pulsed faintly as though carrying a current. Beneath their boots, the floor was warmer than the air. The deeper they went, the less the place felt frozen. It felt preserved. After several hundred meters, the passage opened into a second hall. It was vast, its ceiling lost in shadow, the walls lined with immense crystalline columns. Inside each column shimmered faint shapes, organic yet unfamiliar, their outlines blurred as though caught mid-motion before the ice had sealed them in. Dr. Kato, the team's biologist, moved closer, shining his lantern into one of the frozen pillars. The beam passed through layers of refracted color until it met the shape within. A figure almost human, yet taller, more slender, its features elongated and calm. Its eyes were closed, its expression peaceful. "It's not human," Kato whispered, "but it's not alien either." Evelyn approached, breath fogging the ice. Preserved or entombed. The instruments they carried, thermometers, magnetometers, registered impossible readings. Heat radiated faintly from the figures. The ice around them remained stable, refusing to melt, as though maintaining its own equilibrium. Kato scraped a minute sample of the ice near the surface and sealed it in a sterile container. "We'll analyze the isotope's topside," he said softly. "If these are biological, they're unlike anything we've cataloged." They moved deeper into the hall. Each column held a different scene, pairs of figures standing beside enormous spheres of crystal, others seated before spiral patterns etched into stone. The artistry was flawless, yet these were no sculptures. Every instinct told Evelyn that these were beings, perhaps the builders themselves, suspended in a state beyond decay. In the far end of the hall stood something different, a dais carved from a single block of obsidian-like material, half buried in frost. On its surface lay a lattice of translucent rods, arranged in concentric circles. The rods shimmered faintly, emitting a tone just beyond hearing. Malik crouched to examine them. "It's harmonic geometry," he murmured. "Each rod tuned to a frequency. This isn't decoration, it's information." "Like data storage." "Exactly, but physical, not digital. The vibration is the record." They called it the library beneath. When Evelyn touched one of the rods, the air around her rippled like heat. The faint hum shifted, aligning into chords that resonated through her bones. She saw flashes, images not of sight but of understanding, maps of the world without ice, stars drawn in living color, structures rising where now there were oceans. A civilization built not around conquest but equilibrium. Then the vision faded, leaving her breathless. "They knew the Earth would change," she whispered. "They prepared for it. They preserved themselves inside the planet." Kato's radio crackled faintly, a sound impossible this deep underground. Static pulsed in sync with the rhythmic hum of the ice. A fragment of a voice emerged, faint, mechanical, repeating 3 syllables that none of them could decipher. "Feedback," Malik suggested, though the look in his eyes said he knew better. They returned to the surface with samples, sketches, and a silence that followed them like a shadow. Back in the station's lab, Kato began his analysis. Under the microscope, the ice sample revealed microscopic structures, cells, but unlike any known life. Their arrangement was hexagonal, crystalline, as if biology and mineral had become one. The nuclei pulsed faintly even now, long after extraction, releasing bursts of faint blue light. Evelyn stared at the readout. "They're still active." "Not alive," Kato corrected. "Not dead either." "Dormant," Malik murmured. He pointed to a series of repeating patterns within the cell walls. These ratios, they're mathematical constants, Fibonacci sequences, perfect spirals. It's like the genome was written by a geometer. Evelyn felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. They encoded their knowledge into themselves. If that were true, then life down there wasn't merely preserved. It was data, memory made flesh, sleeping in symmetry until the right conditions called it back. Later that night, when the others slept, Evelyn sat alone in the lab. She replayed the audio recording of the hum from the library. Slowed down tenfold, the resonance formed a pattern, tones rising and falling in repeating cycles, 12 beats, then a pause. Within it, she recognized the same ratio that defined the structure of the city itself. 3 circles, 1 point of origin. It wasn't random. It was intentional, a signature, perhaps a message. Her pencil hovered over her notebook before she wrote the words quietly, almost as if afraid they might hear. We are not the first. We are the children of their design. Outside, the wind stirred faintly, lifting loose snow across the horizon. For a heartbeat, Evelyn thought she saw the Aurora shifting in deliberate motion, a spiral of light mirroring the symbol carved beneath the ice. Then the world went still again, listening. The next morning dawned gray and still, the horizon swallowed by a thin mist that seemed to rise from the ice itself. The world looked washed clean, as if waiting to be rewritten. Inside the station, silence had become a language, the quiet acknowledgement of those who understood they had crossed the threshold between science and something older. Evelyn gathered the team in the mess hall. The heat lamps buzzed faintly overhead, casting a dull orange over faces pale from sleepless nights. In front of her lay a printout of Cato's findings and a set of sketches from the library beneath. At the center of both was the same symbol, 3 concentric circles and a single point of light. They built it, she said softly, to last longer than memory. Malik leaned forward, eyes red-rimmed. You're saying they knew the cataclysm was coming? They didn't just know. She replied, they caused it or tried to control it. He frowned. Control what? The balance between fire and ice. She pulled out a fragment from Renaud's 1938 notes, recovered from a museum archived the night before. The builders harnessed the planet's energy directly, drawing power from the poles themselves. But when the alignment failed, the equilibrium shattered. The world froze overnight. A myth, perhaps, but one now impossible to dismiss. The team returned to the site beneath the glacier, driven by a mixture of reverence and fear. The corridors seemed wider, the light stronger, as though the city were awakening to their recognition. At the end of the hall of frozen figures, a new passage had opened, a seam in the ice leading into blackness. It was Malik who noticed the faint, warm air drifting from within. They entered. The path sloped downward through smooth tunnels that twisted in gentle arcs, always descending. The deeper they went, the warmer it became. Walls glowed faintly with internal light, pulsing in rhythm with the hum that had haunted them since the first drilling. Then the tunnel opened into a chamber so vast it defied comprehension. The ceiling shimmered with patterns of light, stars mirrored in the ice. In the center rose a pillar of crystal, encased in coils of metal unlike any known alloy, its surface alive with flowing color. Cato checked his thermometer and shook his head. This shouldn't be possible. The heat down here should melt everything, yet it's stable. Evelyn approached the pillar slowly. Embedded along its base were symbols identical to those on the library's rods, geometry that seemed to hum when she passed her hand above it. The pillar pulsed faintly, a slow exhale of blue-white energy that radiated into the chamber. This is it, she whispered, the heart of the city. Malik knelt, studying the engravings. It's an energy matrix, he murmured, a system for regulating the planet's magnetic fields. If they built this to balance the Earth's poles, then when they failed, Evelyn finished, the world froze. The builders had not vanished. They had sacrificed themselves, locking their creation, and perhaps their own forms, beneath the ice to prevent the imbalance from consuming the planet. The city was not buried by accident. It had been entombed deliberately, a self-sealing mechanism for planetary survival. Cato stared up at the massive column, awe softening his features. They were trying to save the world. And maybe, Evelyn added, they still are. The hum deepened, echoing through the chamber like a heartbeat. Instruments flickered, then stabilized as though synchronizing to the rhythm. The light brightened, illuminating the carvings on the walls, scenes of a world in transformation. Oceans boiling, mountains collapsing, people looking skyward as a vast aurora descended like a veil. And then beneath those scenes, a final carving, figures kneeling around the same pillar, hands raised in unison, faces calm even as waves of fire and ice closed over them. Malik exhaled. They knew it would happen, they accepted it. The light surged again. A beam of blue energy shot upward through the pillar, striking the ceiling of ice. For an instant, the world above trembled. Seismic instruments at the surface began to scream. Magnetic flux is spiking, Kato shouted. It's interacting with the Earth's field. The pillar pulsed faster, responding to something unseen, perhaps the presence of their bodies, perhaps the attention of their minds. The air shimmered. Evelyn felt her thoughts vibrating as if the light were reading her. Then, amid the sound and color, came a voice, not in words but in meaning. It entered their minds gently, a whisper formed of emotion and image. A balance once broken must be renewed. The sleepers awaken when the inheritors are ready to listen. And then silence. The pillar dimmed, returning to its steady heartbeat glow. The tremors subsided. But above ground at the station, new readings appeared on every monitor. Global temperature shifts, subtle but measurable, magnetic variations synchronized across the poles. The builder's system had stirred again. Evelyn stood in the fading light, eyes closed. They never died, she said softly. They became the planet's memory. The Earth itself is their archive. They left the chamber in silence, the hum following them like a lullaby. Behind them, the light faded back to its patient rhythm. When they reached the surface, the aurora had returned, painting the sky in spirals of blue and white. The shapes mirrored the carvings beneath the ice. It was as if the heavens were remembering too. Evelyn raised her face to the cold wind, her voice barely a breath. They sealed their empire beneath the ice to protect the balance, not from nature, but from us. The others stood beside her, wordless. In that moment, the Antarctic silence seemed infinite again, no longer empty but watchful, aware. Far below, in the heart of the buried city, the pillar's pulse continued, steady, waiting, eternal. The first change was so gentle that almost no one noticed. A shift in the wind, a hum beneath the usual silence of the poles. The world above the ice carried on, planes flew, lights burned, the endless machinery of civilization murmured as it always had, but something deep in the planet's breath had altered its rhythm. Evelyn felt it first. Standing outside the station, wrapped in the gray light of another Antarctic morning, she sensed the difference not through her instruments but through her bones. The air felt heavier, warmer, as if the glacier itself were exhaling. On the horizon, faint pillars of light shimmered, columns rising into the clouds and dissolving again, like ghosts practicing flight. Inside, the data confirmed it. Global magnetic fluctuations synchronized at intervals matching the pulse from the buried pillar. Ocean currents shifting, jet streams bending in new patterns. Aurora activity increasing tenfold, spreading far beyond polar latitudes. It was as if the heartbeat of the city below had rippled outward, stirring the sleeping veins of the planet. She tried to explain it to the others. "It's not random," she said, tracing the numbers across the screen. "This is coherence, systemic alignment. The entire planet is resonating with one frequency." Malik stared at the graphs in silence. "You mean the builders are communicating?" Evelyn hesitated. "Or awakening, or both." For the first time, the idea didn't sound impossible. Over the next days, the effects intensified. The skis over the Antarctic coast burned with auroras visible even at noon, white fire shimmering across the horizon, weaving patterns so intricate they resembled script. Instruments recorded increases in background radiation, though none of it harmful. Around the world, compasses wandered, tides misbehaved, and migratory animals altered their paths as if following an unseen call. Messages poured in from research stations and satellites, all describing the same event. Rhythmic energy waves radiating outward from the South Pole in precise, 12-second intervals. the same rhythm as the builder's pulse. It was Malik who first noticed the strange harmony buried within the data. When he converted the magnetic oscillations into sound, the result was haunting, a slow, melodic chord that seemed to breathe. The earth was singing. They began to call it the pulse of the world. But with it came a rising unease. Governments demanded explanations. Military craft appeared in Antarctic airspace, their lights like red stars drifting above the endless white. Transmission frequencies were restricted, research feeds censored. Evelyn received encrypted messages warning her to suspend all communication until further notice. "We triggered something," she whispered one night, staring out across the glacier, "and now they want to own it." Malik joined her at the window. The Aurora shimmered overhead, casting slow-moving shadows across the ice. "You can't own what's alive," he said softly. "You can only misunderstand it." Below them, the buried city hummed faintly, steady, patient, aware. On the fifth day, the tremors began. Not violent, but rhythmic, soft, rolling waves that passed beneath their feet every 12 seconds in time with the pulse. At first, it was mesmerizing, then unsettling. The entire continent seemed to breathe. Cato's instruments went wild. Temperature readings rose, not gradually, but in pulses. Brief surges of warmth followed by normal cold. Beneath the surface, geothermal scans revealed corridors of heat extending outward from the city like arteries. "It's redistributing energy," Cato murmured. "The system's awake." Outside, the air took on a faint charge. Even through gloves, their skin tingled when they touched the ground. The snow itself began to change, glittering under unseen light, as though infused with luminescence from below. Evelyn stood at the edge of the excavation shaft, staring down into the tunnel that led to the builder's city. A faint blue glow shimmered within, pulsing to the same steady rhythm. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Malik's voice came from behind her, "or it's remembering." That night, as the others slept, Evelyn recorded her thoughts in the station's log. Her voice was calm but distant, as if speaking from within a dream. "The energy is global now. It resonates in magnetic, atmospheric, and even biological systems. Plants germinate faster. Heart rates synchronize with the pulse during sleep. It's as if the builder's design wasn't just technological, it was organic. They wove consciousness into the planet itself. Maybe that's why they vanished. They didn't die. They became the system." She paused, looking at the Aurora through the small window. "If that's true, then the light returning isn't a threat. It's a conversation." She didn't notice the faint change in her reflection, the brief flicker of another face, serene and elongated, watching her from the glass before fading back into her own. The next morning brought a phenomenon that no one could explain. The snow surrounding the station had melted in perfect circles, 12 meters across, each one positioned equidistant from the others, forming a geometric pattern visible from above. When mapped, the pattern matched the carvings on the builder's chamber floor. "The surface is responding," Malik said quietly. "The city's geometry is projecting itself upward through the ice through us." They stood outside in the endless cold, surrounded by light and silence. For the first time, the Antarctic no longer felt empty. It felt inhabited by presence, by intention, by something that had been waiting far longer than humanity had been able to imagine. And as the sky shifted, waves of soft color rippling across the heavens, Evelyn realized what the builders had created was not simply a city. It was a living archive, a consciousness distributed through crystal, stone, and water, woven into the bones of the earth. It was waking up.